am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Jamie Sabat, the founder of Distill Express, a health and wellness consultancy specializing in natural solutions. With over 15 years of experience in the trend forecasting industry, Jamie is a thought leader and early identifier of long-range trends in the wellness space. She is a trailblazer in her industry, discovering healthy ingredients for food, the hippest workouts, and innovations in activewear. As a wellpreneur, Jamie provides the opportunity and game plan, empowering women to live a life of abundance in health and wellness. During my interview with Jamie, we discussed her journey from growing up in Washington, D.C., surrounded by attorneys and politicians where she felt out of place. Through her self-discovery, she found confidence and thrived when she found her sense of self in creative roles from fashion in Europe to real estate in D.C. Welcome to this episode with Breaking Beliefs, and I'm here with Jamie Sabat. And Jamie, do you want to give a brief background on yourself before we begin?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Amy. And I'm Jamie Sabat. I'm a manifestation mentor. And I use the law of attraction along with really powerful mindset tools like EFT, you've probably heard of tapping, hypnosis, and time techniques to remove the limiting beliefs in our lives in order to attract the things that we want into our life.
Great. Well, I'm happy to have you here. And for our listeners, we've definitely been taking a focus in the last few episodes on just ways that we can incorporate mindfulness into our days, our work, our lives, and there's so many different outlets we can explore. And Jamie definitely brings one of those. But before we get started, we always like to kind of go back and learn a little bit about you and how you started and got to what you're doing today. So maybe you can talk about where you grew up, what was your family like, and so forth.
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm actually back in my hometown of Washington, D.C. I grew up here, and most of my family actually worked for the government, were lawyers, and that was, the way that I grew up. Going to school with Chelsea Clinton and the Gore family, that's a Washingtonian, Washington, D.C. type of life, lots of politics. But since then, I actually had the opportunity to live and travel all over the world, working as a trend forecaster in fashion. So I lived in London and Paris and New York City and was able to go to the runway shows and see what the trends were happening globally and all throughout the world, which is pretty exciting. But my wellness journey actually really began with my daughter. I have to say, I had my son in New York City, which is where I lived for 15 years, and I had a pretty traumatic birth. So with my daughter, I was determined to have a natural birth. And at my 8th month of pregnancy, I discovered essential oils. And through learning about essential oils and that they're not just fragrance or pretty flowery things, but actually natural medicine, I was able to use them to have a natural birth. No epidural, no painkillers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Really just using the essential oils. I learned a protocol on what, like lavender and copaiba and these powerful plants. But when I had that birth, it was like I took my power back. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I feel like started my mission of wanting to help other women feeling empowered to be in control of their body, to be in control of their health, to be in control of their destiny and their lives. And from there, I learned Reiki, and learn the power of energy and how that worked. And the way that happened was actually, it's not even, I don't believe in coincidence. I started selling the essential oils when I was on my maternity leave, because that's how powerful it was for me having this natural birth, that I was selling them at a yoga studio, and the same woman was a repeat client. And we started to get to know each other. And she told me she was a Reiki master. And I'm like, what is that? She's like, I conduct energy and move it through the body for healing and mitigating stress and pain. And I was like, well, sign me up. And I've done my level 1, 2, and 3 and become a master now. And that set me on to the journey of manifestation and really learning more about the law. There's actually 12 laws of the universe, but learning more about the law of attraction and how to harness it and how to be more empowered and conscious with my mind and how I want to live my life.
Okay. So, before we get to all of that, want to go back and really get to what was your beginning. So that's where you got to today. But as far as growing up, what did you imagine you were going to be? So were your parents lawyers, and what were they doing?
Yeah, so my mother actually was a lawyer working for the Department of Transportation and was a President Clinton appointee.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so I grew up in the time of the 80s, where, especially as an African American woman, where it was like the Huxtables, like you become a lawyer or you become a doctor, and if you're not one of those things, you're not successful.
Yeah. Was your dad in the same field as well?
No, my dad actually wasn't really around when I was growing up.
Okay.
My parents got divorced when I was younger, but my mom and my other relatives, my aunts and uncles, are all lawyers, which clearly I am not.
Yeah. But did you think you were going to be, because of growing up with your mom doing that kind of work?
Well, so I was more interested in people. So I actually started off in college, freshman year, as a psychology major.
Okay.
But it was all so depressing and so intense for me as a freshman that I actually moved more into marketing.
Okay.
I decided to go into graphic design, because I thought if I was a graphic designer, then I would be able to create magazines or send my message out to people and connect with people on a mass way. So I started with, so I moved from psychology because I thought I was going to be a doctor, and moved more into marketing and graphic design.
Okay. And then, so your mom being a lawyer, how did that come to be? Like, was that in her family, or how did she dream of that for herself?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my grandfather and grandmother met at historically Black colleges in Atlanta,
Okay.
Clark and Spelman. And my grandfather was one of 11 children that grew up on a farm, but his brother actually grew an empire in the hair and cosmetology business in Atlanta.
Okay.
And he decided to move north. And when he moved north, he became an entrepreneur and a businessman. So they, of course, wanted their daughter to go to college and become an accolade. And my mother went to Smith College, an all-women's college in Northampton, Massachusetts, and then went to GW Law immediately after. So my family was very much a group of overachievers, and just feeling like education and following the rule book was more of the way to gain success, which is understandable in the 70s and 80s, especially for an African-American family, of just, following the rule book of like, okay, go to college, get your master's degree in whatever it is, and follow that path.
Right. And did you have siblings as well?
No, I grew up actually as an only child.
Okay.
And so I had no one else to commiserate with on how to rebel.
So did you always know that it was something that kind of went against the grain for you?
Always.
Really? When was the first time that you realized that?
Oh, well, Amy, I was a troublemaker from the beginning. I mean, I got kicked out of Sunday school because I told the teacher that there's no way that Jesus walked on water, because I just learned about gravity. So that, first grade. And then when I was in high school, I went to one of the best all girls schools in the country, but I just never felt like I fit in. Like I was in the art studio most of the time, whereas like other people were taking like AP calculus and like AP, and it's like the path was to go to the Ivy
Right.
from the school that I went to. And I just never felt like I fit into the norms and the conformity of society. I'm also an Aquarius. I'm an Aquarius.
Oh, so am I.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm an Aquarius, Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very rebellious and thinking outside of the box and thinking of, society as a group instead of individuality. And I just didn't really fit into any of those boxes.
Yeah. So how did that make you feel growing up? Like, did you feel confident in that, or did you feel like something was wrong with you at the time?
Well, I felt I think probably in the age of the early adolescence, like 12 and 13, I did feel a little strange, but moving into 15 and 16-year-old, I just owned it. Mm-hmm. Like I had steel toe Doc Martens. I went to ska concerts. I was heavy into all of the alternative music, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nirvana. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was like into Nirvana.
Yeah.
And I just didn't care. And I just found that my group of friends were, I guess, a part of the like popular group, but we were like the rebellious ones that people were like, well, what are they doing on the weekend?
Right. So what do you think flipped that for you, where you were like, okay with who you are?
And I think some of the confidence did come from going to a single sex school. There weren't like boys around to really kind of influence the popularity. It was more, at my school, it was more about how smart you were. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it was. I think it was, it was just around that time when alternative music came out and it was kind of acceptable to be weird. Mm-hmm. I followed the artist and I have to admit, my mother and my grandparents were supportive of me being interested in art and being interested in fine art and going to the museums and the theater. So my family was supportive of me, even though they, of course, wanted me to become a doctor.
Right.
They were supportive.
So do you think they helped to guide you in the direction that you wanted to go? Like, how did they help with that?
Well, they sent me to a counselor. Extra support. They definitely did that. So having someone else to talk to that is not your parent or that is not a friend,
right?
I highly recommend. Obviously, I'm a life coach, so I highly recommend that. But I did have, through my adolescent years, I did have a counselor that I leaned on and was able to really help me grow into my own. And then I became the editor of my school yearbook and was super into photography, black and white photography, art history. So I think having that other party really helped me to cultivate my skills and hone them more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely, I think sometimes there's a stigma about that when it actually is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself, but for the people around you as well. So that you're not putting out the wrong kind of energy because you're being put in a box you're not comfortable with, and someone's there to kind of help guide you from an independent perspective.
Yes. And it's interesting because now I think even more so, it's a status symbol. It was a stigma before, but now people are like, yeah, my coach, my Reiki, my shaman, my Reiki healer, like it's become more of a status symbol to say that you are surrounded by an entourage of people that lift you up and support you.
Yeah. In the corporate world, we call that your advisory board. It's your personal advisory board, right? Yes. To help with the mental health stuff that we all need. It's hard to do it all by yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I'm a coach as well that I meet with every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went to school and ended up graduating in what did you end up graduating?
So I got a BFA. So I'm grateful for the encouragement. And I was able to study abroad. So I studied in London And I got my BFA and graduated from school there, and, went to some of the best art galleries in the world and really got to see art up close. I mean, I've been to Rome and seen the Sistine Chapel and smelled it, and living in Europe studying art was just phenomenal. It was amazing. So, but in graphic design, that was my focus. And I'm so grateful for that, because that's how I was able to use and hone my skills to get into trend forecasting. I was able to create books and manuals that were used in the fashion forecasting world.
And how did you get into that?
So right around the school so I lived in London near Baker Street, which is where Sherlock Holmes lived.
Okay.
Right in that area was a marketing innovation firm called What If, and I'm forever grateful to them. My mentor there took me under her wing because I was, laying things out just like as a student and doing graphics work for them. And she said, Jamie, we've got to get into forecasting. And I'm like, what's that? She's like, you travel the world, you go to the hotels, you look at fashion, and you tell people what you think.
Sign me up.
And that, was my career for 15, 20 years. And little did I know that it was really connected to energy and connected to human beings and connected to this cultural movements more than fashion. I mean, obviously Marc Jacobs and Karl Lagerfeld, they pick up on the energy, and they're true artists. And that's how they create fashion, is because they're picking up on cultural movements.
Yeah. So I think that's important no matter what you're doing. When you think about your job and that level of awareness you need to have, and not put your own opinion in. Because if you're in any kind of job of forecasting trends, no matter what you're doing in your profession, you're not going to be accurate if you're putting your own what you want. You have to be more aware of what's happening. So even during those times before you got into what you do now, how do you think you got yourself present to take yourself out of it and just observe in those times?
Well, what's sad, because I've always been strange from a very young age. I actually started, and I'm now 43, but I started doing yoga when I was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So I've basically had a lifelong practice of yoga. Mm-hmm. And that really helped me, and always interested I'm also Buddhist as well, always interested in Eastern philosophy. I only started recently meditating in the last few years, but Buddhism and yoga kind of always allowed me to be grounded. Because working in fashion is crazy. There's runway shows, there's parties, there's drugs and rock and roll and all of that kind of stuff. But I, no matter where I lived in the world, I always maintained my yoga practice. So I don't know if that's the thing that kind of got me through and really helped me have a separation of ego and self. Because if you're writing about the runway shows and saying, this is what the trend is, you obviously have to remove yourself and say, I might not like this. I don't think throwing paint on clothing is cool. I don't want to wear that. It's not about me. It's about the people. It's about the generations. It's about the millennials and what they want, or what's happening with Gen Z, and they're into sustainability. It's not about me. I'm neither one of those generations, actually. Mm-hmm. So it's more about picking up on that and knowing how to separate the ego from the conscious.
And is it a struggle sometimes, especially when you don't like what you're seeing?
It is.
Yeah. So how do you overcome that? Yeah. I think everybody goes through that, right?
Yeah. I've always had doing breath work. Mm-hmm. I've always had, my yoga practice. I'm really into yoga nidra, which I'm not sure if you know, but it's a kind of hypnotic or meditative state. It's actually what the Dalai Lama does. Mm-hmm. The Dalai Lama uses that to actually reincarnate, which I just recently learned, but it's called yoga nidra. Mm-hmm. And and journaling. I like to write. I feel like that's different than typing, when you write from pen to paper, it's you go into a hypnotic state where you learn things and discover things that you might not consciously know are there.
Right. And then you have that outlet for yourself versus what you've got to do for your work.
Exactly. Yes, it's more like it's funny because science, fashion is science. It's like trends. It's a pendulum. They swing from one direction to the next. Like so, in the '80s, it was Versace and gold and over the top, and then the '90s were minimalism and gray. So it's more of looking at it in that way and allowing to have that separation of like it's more of a science.
Right. And you're kind of documenting history as it's happening.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you did that for 15 years, you said.
Yes.
So, you had your son at some point during this period of time?
Yeah. So then I had my son, and I really, I was traveling all over the world and traveling frequently, sometimes 2 different cities in 1 week. And I just felt like, how can I continue doing that? Like my focus is on my child now. And I honestly didn't know what I was going to do. It just kind of all came to me. And I think having the traumatic birth, unfortunately, was a part of my journey. It feeling powerless, feeling out of control, feeling lost, and really being in that dark place was a part of my journey.
And he's healthy now?
Yeah, he's doing really well now, and everything worked out fine. But it was a scary moment.
Right. Yeah. So then you so how did you shift your career once you had him?
So that's where the manifestation all began, because my husband and I were living in New York City. I was working in fashion. I had James. I was still like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I just realized I couldn't. And my husband was actually working in tech, but with nonprofits. And there's so many nonprofits in Washington, D.C. And I grew up here and all my family was here. So to move from New York to Washington, D.C. was a perfect move for us.
Right.
And then as I stayed home in my state of kind of worry and confusion with James, I stayed home with him for 1.5 years. And my husband actually came home. He was in a WeWork space and said, I think I found the right place for you to work. And it was this super interesting architectural firm that had marketing, restaurants, hotels, multifamily all combined, and real estate all combined under one roof. And my whole thing was like, after working in fashion for so long, I wanted to work with Ian Schrager and Philippe Stark, like those types of genius minds, like in the built environment.
Right.
So it just started manifesting towards me. And then I shifted into working in real estate, which I never thought that I would.
So how did you get that job?
So that's another crazy thing. I started looking up the company on LinkedIn, and the art director at that company was friends with one of my best friends that I grew up with in high school. So she immediately connected me to her. I went in for an interview and they were like, well, your background is kind of weird. I don't know what to do with you, but we like your thinking and we like that you have a global perspective. So I was hired actually in a role of project direction, like project management, actually. So not even really what I was doing. And then after 1 year of being there, they created a role for me doing consumer research and consumer forecasting. So it just all kind of like manifested and moved towards the right role for me.
Right.
After being there for 1 year.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing for people, is that a lot of times if we don't see the position that we want, we don't even apply. And I think what you're talking about is like, I found a place I wanted to work, and then I don't have any of the skill sets they're looking for.
Right.
So how do I take what is my expertise and apply it into another field? And I think a lot of people get stuck. I remember, it was kind of mid-career, but I had given up painting. I loved painting when I was in high school as well. And I wanted to go and do more of it. Or I didn't know what it was like to have a business in it or what. And I saw this painter during an art auction, and he really resonated with me. So I went to him and I was like, what should I do? Like, I really want to get back into it. And he's like, you get in the car, you go to Michael's, you buy paint and a canvas board and go home and paint. Like, there's not like a step to move to another thing, right? It's like, you just have to get your hands dirty and get in it.
And go. And I think that that's such an important lesson for women too, who have gone, had children, gone to work, gone off of work. You're just like, well, you feel like that time has passed and there's new technology and the workforce has changed. But what can you do? The only thing you can do is just jump in and create it for yourself.
Right. And it goes back to what you were saying before, is the ego versus self, because sometimes you have to start over. Like, you can't have in your head, like, well, I was this world traveler and I saw all these top designers and I was at the top of my game. But if you're trying to shift into another field, you're going to have to take a couple steps back to move forward.
And you have to learn that field. I knew nothing about real estate. They were like sending me floor plans to figure, and I was like, what is a floor plan? Like,
right.
I know what it is, but like, what am I supposed to do with it? Amy, it was literally like I was a freshman in college again, and I just had to stay up at night and figure it out until they saw this girl has learned, she's figured it out. Like, okay, she has this background and then this whole thing created, but I humbled myself to move forward.
Right. And put in the extra time, not expect to get paid to learn it.
Exactly.
So as you're doing this, then you got pregnant with your second child along this journey. So this is what then started your next pivot.
Yeah. So I think it was from that time of having James and then starting at the architectural firm, it was just a continued human revolution for me of just shifting and changing. And then I also just think I actually am releasing a course at the end of the year on conscious parenting. Being a parent is a huge mirror in your face of what are you doing? And like, how do you want the world to be? It's just, there's no way around it. It's just in your face. So as I began to evolve and moving into that new role, I became more aware of natural solutions and meditation and deepening my yoga practice and questioning life. What does it all mean? Like really deep. And that's when I discovered, at the
Was there something that caused you to do that, you think, during this? Yeah,
well, I think, the traumatic birth, the moving, the shift in the career, all of those things being like, what does it all mean?
So then you're kind of like, who am I?
Who am I? Who am I anymore? Because after you've been working in fashion for 15 or 20 years, and then you're not, and you're not living in the place that you were living in over a decade, it just makes you question, and you're back in your hometown. It's a feeling of like, am I a failure? What does this mean? And then also being in a place where in New York City and in London and Paris, I felt like an artist. I felt like I was in the right place. Being an artist in Washington, D.C., where basically everyone is a lawyer and most people work for the government. It's like Hollywood. If you're not an actor, you're in Hollywood. It feels like you question, why am I here?
Right.
So a lot of factors coming into play for me. And then also being a mom, it's an identity shift. It's an identity change you're a new person. So a lot of thinking going on. And so then of course, when you're thinking, Google meditation, action, what does it all mean?
Right.
Yeah. You start doing your research.
Yeah. And I think it's, what is important is something we talk about all the time on this podcast is about, taking those moments to pause, not quit. Right. Because when you're at those moments of inflection, and I think we have them throughout our lives, it's easy to kind of just be like, I just want to like quit everything and start over, or, and something, because it just doesn't feel good, which that doesn't necessarily answer your, what you need, because you can't run away from yourself. So it's really that exploration of self that begins what belief systems align. And what's kind of interesting about yours is you're back to where you began. So now you're really hitting this didn't align with me growing up.
Right.
And now I'm back, right?
Exactly.
So how do you explore that belief system in you and get past it and get comfortable?
Exactly. And now that I know more about mindset tools and how the mind works, in every moment, like in this moment of now, there's infinite possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I could have even stayed home with my son.
Right.
And also never had a daughter. I mean, there's a million different instances where you can create an entirely new reality.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in that state of exploration and just and letting it happen and saying, okay, I'm going to push forward and discover what I can possibly do with my life and what I can create. It's like the hands in the clay. Once again, it's shifting and molding and growing and moving through it.
Which is uncomfortable.
Yes.
Many times. So you got into some new practices you were telling me about, like astrology, and you talked about the essential oils in the beginning, but how did you get into the astrology side of things?
Well, I have to, in 2020, it was a matter of time, actually. I've always been connected to astrology, and I cannot believe I've waited this long to get my mastership in it. It's one of those things when I meet someone, I just say, well, what sign are you? It's just a natural question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's normal for everyone else, but for me, and I know more about the person knowing what sign they are. Mm-hmm. So diving deep into that, I was like, this is actually, people are like, do you believe in astrology? It's like, there's nothing to believe in. It's just where the stars were and the planets were when you took your first breath, like when you were born. So it's more science actually in a way than a belief system. So as I learned more, I decided that I wanted to put it into my program, into my coaching program, because I feel like how can you start to know where you're going to go unless you know who you are? Right. So that's actually the very first session.
Well, and it's interesting because I started learning about this probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And I find it fascinating because it's so accurate, on what, it's kind of scary accurate sometimes, but I mean, this is kind of, different comparison, but I was during quarantine was watching the show Indian Matchmaker, and that is actually one of the first steps they do in the matchmaking process is going through their astrological makeup, which is really interesting, and probably especially if two people haven't met, of how they intertwine from a science perspective, which and these things have been around for thousands of years. It's like, how do they know, before science today?
That's actually because I'm super into, now that I know that the subconscious mind is molded in children from the age of 0 to 7, I want to use astrology for children. Right. Like when I finally read my chart, I was like, oh, so I'm supposed to be a speaker. And I was terrified of public speaking, didn't start doing it in my career till I was 32. If someone had told me that when I was in elementary school, I would have taken a course, I would have focused. So I'm doing that with my kids. So I experiment everything on my children. Yeah. Palo Santo, we've got it all going on over here. But what a great tool to use for children.
Yes. Yeah. Well, my son's really into it right now. He's constantly asking. He's 16. Well, what's their sign?
Get him going at a young age.
That's So how did you transition into coaching? What caused that for you?
Another manifestation. People started coming to me. They're like, what is it that you're doing? Why do you what's going on? Why do you look so good? You look happy. What's happening? And I'm like, happy to show you. So I quickly pulled together a program and a process. I sat down, I was like, okay, so what am I doing? And what are my 5 steps that I'm doing to manifest what I want? So I started figuring it out and then put it together. And I just quickly started getting clients. So I mean, the CIA knows about manifestation. So
Yeah.
I started researching more about manifestation, and I'm like, okay, this is actually science. It's
Yeah.
nothing, it's not like a magic potion or made up or anything like that. It's like that, it's just like the law of gravity.
Right. So maybe you can explain more for the listeners what that is.
Sure, definitely. So basically, we are creating the reality that we live in with the filters and with the programming that's in our subconscious mind. So, our subconscious mind is created from the age of 0 to 7. That's why we say children are like sponges. You have no filter. So, your parents, your caretakers, your teachers, your friends in school, all are influencing your personality. So, if you're raised in India, or if you're raised in the United States, or you're raised in Europe, all of those elements, your culture, your religion, are having an impact on your personality and who you're becoming. So as you're moving through life and as you're in that time of subconscious age, let's say a traumatic event happens. I'll just say a kid makes fun of you on the playground, or simple thing, your mom says you can't have a lollipop and you get mad. All of that builds up into the programming in your life. And then moving into teenagehood and to adulthood, we are living our life through those filters. So the more that we do that, the more of it comes to us, because the law of attraction says that which is like unto itself, it is drawn. So people are like, teach me how to manifest. I'm like, well, you're manifesting all the time. It's a magnet. It's just drawing. So you want to manifest the things that you want, not the things that you don't want.
Right.
So subconscious programming is creating our reality around us. Where do we live? What kind of car do we drive? What kind of partner do we have? Our children, where do we work? So if you want to change what you're manifesting, because you're already manifesting it, you have to change the subconscious programming. So we can do that through hypnosis. We can go into the subconscious mind, and hypnosis is simply, it's not, oh, you're getting on stage and you're, quacking like a duck and looking like a chicken. It's a relaxive state, just like you would be in a trance if you're scrolling through your phone, watching Netflix, driving to work, and you're like, how did I get here? Your subconscious mind kicks in. If we had to think about every time brushing our teeth, like get the toothpaste, put it on, blah, 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 we would never get anything done. That's why we have the subconscious mind. So what we're doing, the mind is a powerful computer. We're changing the programming. We're just changing it to get what we want. So another powerful tool that I like to use is called time techniques. We have a timeline of our life, future, past. If there are things that are in our past that are holding us back, we can go into our childhood and we can change the incident. We can rewrite the story. And if there's a goal that we're trying to achieve, we can go forward on our timeline and we can implant that on our timeline in the future. So I mean, hypnosis is powerful, but time techniques is super powerful for changing your timeline. And it's all about releasing the things that don't serve us, so that we can allow in and magnetize and bring in the things that we want.
Yeah. And I'll just add a point of clarification on that with the specialists I've talked to on that as well, of you're not actually changing the story. The story is going to be the story. It's almost like changing how it impacts your body, or how you will feel that story. So it's not like it changes you as a human. You are whatever you are, but you might, like you said, like you had a filter, a lens of a 7-year-old in that experience. Now, as a 40-something-year-old, if you go back to that experience and sit in it, and observe it, then it's kind of like, can you see that experience in black and white versus color? Right. And you're not letting it affect your current day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's an important tool for people that when we talk about breaking belief systems, a lot of our belief systems, we don't even realize where it came from, or something that could have happened on the playground. It doesn't have to be these huge traumatic experiences, is whatever impacted you as a person, you carry like a quilt in your body. And so going back to understand is like, oh, well, now as a 40-something-year-old, if I go back to that story, I can kind of realize all the extenuating circumstances of that story and what's okay and not okay. And I don't want to keep repeating the pattern because of some belief system that was created that I didn't intend to create.
Exactly. And it could be something as simple as your mom didn't give you the lollipop.
Right.
And so you have this feeling of anger, but then when you go back, it's like, oh, well, I already had too much sugar that day. So that makes total sense. But the thing is too, is that when we create that first moment of anger, let's say when we're 2 years old, it compounds over time. So it's like your anger just gets stronger. If we don't release it, that's why we're in a world where people have road rage.
Yeah.
And adults are making decisions about the world, like in the government, as a 7-year-old.
Right.
Because they haven't released the trauma and the pain.
Right. Yeah. So, so many things. We could keep talking, but yeah. But there is, I think so many things in your story apply to so many people, of pivots we make in our life and what we manifest for ourselves to find that happiness. And when you talk about law of attraction, the energy you're putting out is what's attracting people to you to do the work that you enjoy. If it's not authentic, if it's just something you say you do, but then you're not putting that out in the world, people aren't going to believe you. And, it definitely shows authentically through you. So,
well, Amy, really my whole goal in life is to raise the vibration of the planet. It's, just feelings. And I think EQ are going to be one of the next big trends that we see in society 2.0, especially with AI becoming so important. Like us as human beings and our emotions and our feelings, we should be feeling good. Life is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to be happy. So if I can help a person get there, like, then I feel like mission complete. Like that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And it's such an important time right now with people so stressed out and the world changing so fast, and just the acceptance of everybody's pivot that they're going through right now. So I like to end with some rapid fire questions. So you pick a category, family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Ooh, money.
Okay. Things or actions I don't have that I want with money.
Things and actions that I don't have.
That you would want.
More money?
Yes. Things or actions that I do have that I want to keep as far as money.
Investing. I've been investing in Bitcoin and in Robinhood. And that's another thing I share with my clients because that's so important.
Yes. Great. Things or actions I don't have that I don't want.
Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want. Ignorance of the market.
Okay. And things or actions that I do have that I don't want that you'd want to get rid of as far as money.
I would say speculation. You're supposed to invest for 5 years. And I'm like, buy this stock, buy this stock. I feel it's a trend. I'm going to get it.
And that's where you put your personal opinion in.
Yes. Exactly.
Don't do that. Listen to the experts. Well, great. Is there anything that you want to end today? Any message or takeaway that we haven't covered?
I just, want to share, and especially with any women listeners out there, that it's never too late to start your journey to happiness and that you can begin in this moment right now.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on today and sharing your story with our listeners.
Great. Thank you for having me, Amy.
And now for our mindful moments on my discussion with Jamie, where we began talking about her grandparents, where her mother was one of 11 children and definitely wanted their daughter to go to college and follow the rules into what is perceived as success. And Jamie grew up in DC with her mom being an attorney and grew up as an only child and definitely went against the grain of what was accepted in the all-girls school that she was going to because she was so interested in the arts versus a lot of them were more interested in politics. And she found herself out of place, which created her feeling like she was on the outside. And as she grew up, she started noticing what the things were about herself that were special and that gave her confidence as well. And I think it's really important in when we talked about this journey that she talked about the counselor that helped her as a third party, really talking to her to bring out these strengths and know that even if it didn't follow the path that everybody else goes on, that if you have passion about something and something moves you, that you'll find success. And she really did find success in a lot of ways by graduating in graphic design and getting into the fashion industry when she did, and utilizing the intuitive side of her personality where she was able to spot trends and really create this career that was so unique that pulled her in a new direction. And I think it's important for all of us, whether it's people in our families or we do it to others that we are related to ourselves, that maybe a path worked for us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that same path is going to work for everybody. And what's really important is that we connect with what really is our purpose in life and where we find passion. Because if we find passion in things, then work doesn't feel like work. And we can go about it and be really immersed in it and find success in something that maybe we didn't even know was possible. So when we think about the advice we give to others, it's very important that we don't always look through our own lens, that we try to pull back from the way that we see the world and the lens that we see the world from, use our experience, but be very cognizant and aware of the lens that other people look through as well and what drives them. And those are really the questions that are so important about when we help others, or if they're family members of ours, or even when we feel like we're going against the grain, is understanding who we are. And there's a great meditation that's all it is repeating the mantra, who am I? Who am I? Over and over in our mind, and just allowing that to come up for us so that we can identify what makes us tick. And when she started seeing her life pivot as well, even within the career that she had, she was constantly seeking out learning and therapeutic ways of, self-care and so forth. And I think many times when we talk about these practices of yoga or breath work or meditation or hypnotism and other things that she was talking about, sometimes those things are not necessarily talked about because we're not sure how people are going to judge us. And what's important is we're not looking at it as a judgment, that we're looking at it as that these are things along our journey to get to know ourselves better, to observe how we are functioning in the world so that we create better energy for the people around us. And that when we need to make these pivots in our career, and she talked about many of those pivots, that we look at it as possibility rather than where our weaknesses are. Instead, find the things that make us strongest in any direction that we want to go and push forward into it and learn along the way and be open to the learning process. I think many times when we're going into a new field or new career or new job or whatever it is, we're so looking forward to the moment that we can say we got this. But it's actually the journey along the way that's most interesting, that can be most exciting. And we talked a lot during this interview about manifestation, that we decide to create the reality that we want by getting rid of all of these layers that we have that kind of block us from moving forward, or excuses that block us from moving forward, and really try to understand each layer of why that might have happened. These are our belief systems, the belief systems that are created from such a young age, that could be the smallest experience, but we don't realize we still carry in our bodies. And when we notice a pattern coming up from us over and over again, it's important to explore it, to observe it, and then decide, does it serve us? And if it doesn't serve us, work on just that one thing each day so that we can break through that belief system to get us to the other side of exploring something new, of something possible in our lives that maybe we thought was never available to us, but is actually achievable. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.